Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And the 2044 season has been going incredibly well so far. 58-24 record for Oakland, just past the halfway point of the season. 14-game lead on the Rangers in the American League West as we try to earn our way back into the playoffs and hopefully set ourselves up for a potential three-peat this October. We did our annual mid-season review at the end of the last episode, and one topic that I brought up then that has been talked about for several seasons in some cases is what to do at center field with Bobby Armstrong. This is something that both Avery Shaham and Paul West opined upon in the comments section since the last episode. Armstrong, this 27, soon-to-be 28-year-old center fielder, has definitely regressed from what we thought his peak defensive ratings were. And when we look at his batting ratings, 55 contact, 65 gap power, average home run power, and a 65 I, not expecting him to be a absolutely dynamic offensive player, but certainly in theory would expect a player with this profile to be around a league average offensive player at worst, perhaps a little bit better. And unfortunately, he's having a brutal season for us this year with a 67 WRC+, and he's been a well below average offensive player over the course of his career at this point, with an 84 WRC+ over close to 1,800 major league at-bats these past 4 seasons in Oakland and the previous season in Baltimore before we traded for him. So he definitely has not lived up to expectations, and unfortunately, as we think about what we might want to do with him, we do have guys who are prospective center fielders in AAA for us. Unfortunately, they're both injured right now. Now, I'm not claiming that depending on your age that any of these players are Joe DiMaggio or Willie Mays or Gary Pettis or Ken Griffey Jr. defensively. And honestly, with the exception of Gary Pettis, I don't think any of these players are comparable to any of those guys offensively either. But unfortunately, the two guys who are closest to being major league ready and perhaps ready to contribute at center field, or at least give us some more options in the outfield, are both hurt. Jeremy Wright, former first-round draft pick, was up with us briefly in Oakland this year. Has not been great in AAA Las Vegas, but he's out with a partially torn labrum for the next 5 weeks at this point, so likely going to be mid-August before we could potentially consider bringing up Wright. And then Devin Carrick, who's progressed to the number 50 prospect in baseball, is really not a center fielder at all, but could at least give us another option in the outfield, particularly if we wanted to slide Darnell Selvey from left field over to center field. But unfortunately, Carrick also out with a fractured thumb. He suffered about 3 weeks ago, still going to be gone for another 2 to 3 weeks. He was up with us briefly at the end of last year and was having an excellent offensive season in AAA Las Vegas before he got hurt. And last but not least, as we talk about center field options, we did just promote former 6th-round pick in 2039, Ben Prince, who defensively is probably the best of the 3 prospects and has a bat that's developed rather nicely at this point. Recently promoted him to AAA, and he has been raking with a 366 average and 10 ribbies in 41 at-bats at that level after being very productive in AA earlier this year. So he is healthy now, clearly not proven, but do like the range and the error rating on him. Think he can be a more than competent defensive center fielder. In fact, actually think he can be a good defensive center fielder. Probably not a great defensive center fielder. Looking at the right-handed hitter's ratings, definitely would expect him to be better against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching, but seems like he can, hopefully, at least according to those ratings, handle himself at the major league level if we need him there. So Prince, despite only having played 12 games above Double-A in his career at this point, is the most logical name to think about if we need center field help in the near term from our minor league system, given that the other guys I mentioned are both injured right now. So that is one potential option to consider. As we noted at the end of the last episode, the trade block is very sparsely inhabited right now. Certainly early stages for looking for a player in trade here on July 1st. Hopefully there will be more talent out there in the not too distant future. But although Ben Carpenter is solid defensively, he's still only an average defensive center fielder. And none of those guys really, in my mind, have a special bat. So we're not likely to find help on the trade market immediately. But I'm also not quite ready to bring up Ben Prince. So what we have done, and this is something that both Avery Sham and Paul West were on board with, and something that kind of have been tossing about in my head at the end of the last episode and since then, was moving against right-handed pitchers Darnell Selvey into center field. I think he can be a competent defensive center fielder, which honestly I don't know that Armstrong is even much better at this point. We're going to shift designated hitter Juan Ramirez to left field, where we think he can be competent. His range not all that good, but if he gets to a ball, he can make a play on it, and he's got a really good arm. Also hope that might help jumpstart him offensively. Does have 10 homers and 45 ribbies this year, his third year in the majors, but not nearly as productive as he was his first two seasons. And then we're going to give an opportunity for the time being for Nelson Romero to be our designated hitter. But we are going to flip-flop between Ramiro and Godina at first base and DH. Every third day, we're going to let Ramiro play first base and move Godina to designated hitter. But Ramiro has been playing second base for us this year against left-handed pitching. And he's done a really good job his first full years in the majors, hitting .290 with a 141 WRC plus. Looking at his ratings, certainly expect that he's going to be more effective than against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching. We don't actually see that in the numbers this year. He's been absolutely a monster against right-handed pitching. So the thought is that we'll get our old buddy Mr. Armstrong out of the outfield, or at least out of center field against right-handed pitching. We will continue to play Armstrong against left-handed pitching, where he should be somewhat more effective. Still think, looking at his profile, that he could be a useful player for us down the line, but have to be realistic at this point. He's going to be 28 years old before the end of this season. Probably will have close to 1,900 at-bats by the time this year is over, and he's been a well below average offensive player, despite the fact that we think he should be somewhat better than that given his ratings. So eventually maybe looking to move off of Mr. Armstrong. We'll continue to keep an eye on the trade market, and also we'll consider our options among some of those minor leaguers that we mentioned. But for the time being, we're just going to shift things around at the major league level and see if at the very least we can generate a bit more offense with Mr. Ramiro being in the lineup every day rather than Mr. Armstrong, even though we have certainly weakened our defense in left field a bit by moving Selvey to center and putting Ramirez in at left field. And for our long-term viewers who are kind of familiar with the pace of the episodes and the way we tend to play each season, probably not going to be surprised to learn that it's going to be a relatively short episode. We've got 3 games at Boston, 3 games at Houston, and then we're home against San Francisco before we get to draft day. And when we get to draft day, we will take a look at the draft pool, share our initial impressions, and then turn things over to the commenters, also known as our worldwide scouting department, to give us some advice on perhaps what we should do with our 35th pick, final pick of the first round in the 2044 draft here. Unlike previous years, we've had several years in a row where we've lost a significant player in free agent that we made a qualifying offer to. No such thing this year. So we've got the 35th pick in the draft, and then we will not be picking again until the 32nd pick of the second round. So oftentimes in recent years, we've had at least one and sometimes multiple supplemental picks. So we've been a little strategic at times, we hope, in how we've selected the players, taken players who, even if we didn't necessarily like them as much as someone who we took 3 or 4 picks later, if we thought they were more likely to be off the board based on the mock draft, tried to be a little bit strategic in our draft decision making to maximize the talent that we brought on in any given class. But in this situation, with over 30 picks between our first round selection and our next selection, likely to just focus on whoever we think is the best player and hopefully get them picked at number 35 and not necessarily have a lot of strategy involved. I think with where we're picking and the long wait till our next pick, we just take the guy that we like the best, which probably isn't a bad strategy for a draft at any time. And you'll remember that at the end of the last episode, if you watched the last episode, that Joe Heilman had a 0.00 ERA for this season. Just got a 30-game streak without a run scored by Mr. Heilman, which is certainly a great achievement, but you do know the way this game works, that when you get that notification that they've had some great streak without allowing a run scored or having a hitting streak, the pop-up comes when the streak is over, and you can see the dream of a season without allowing an earned run is over for Mr. Heilman. And it was a rough outing for him. 1 hit, a home run, and a walk, 2 earned runs through just 14 pitches, and got only 1 out to blow his first save of the year and pick up his first loss of the year. And I'd like to say it's been a meh start of the month for our Oakland Athletics, but honestly, with a 3-6 record in our first 9 games of the month, it's just been a bad start to the month of July for our Oakland A's, with 6 losses already here in the month of July. We only need 3 more losses to match the most losses we've had in any of the previous months from back in April when we were 18-9. Overall, the team still doing very well, though, 61-30, obviously still in first place. First in the league in runs scored. We have dipped to 3rd in runs allowed, unfortunately, although we still like our pitching staff very much. Unfortunately, big injury for one of our important pitchers. Savion Keys, shoulder inflammation, the young reliever, going to be out for about 3 months. So this is definitely significant. If you've followed previous episodes, you know that the excellent young left-handed reliever Roque de La Paz likely out until some point in the playoffs and may not even be back for the playoffs. And with a 3-month injury for Savion Keys, another excellent left-hander who's put up a 1.80 ERA for us this year in 28 games working out of the bullpen, is also likely now out until some point of the playoffs. And obviously, if we decide to put a Keys or a De La Paz on the roster in mid to late October when they're finally healthy, they're going to be coming in pretty cold without any ability to do any rehab in the minor leagues, whose seasons will obviously be over by then. So not great to lose Mr. Keys, but it is what it is. And as we get ready to turn our attention to the draft, Wright and Carrick, the two young outfielders, remain on the IL and AAA. But importantly, the three important left-handed pitchers, the starter Macho Rangel and the relievers Savian Keys and Roque de la Paz, all on the IL, hoping that we'll have Rangel back with a rehab assignment. It's not inconceivable to think that he may end up being a September call-up, although we'll hold out hope maybe we get him back a week before then. And as I was talking about previously, Keys and De La Paz, with the extent of their injuries, are both likely to be guys who maybe we get into the mix in the bullpen once the playoffs are already up and running. So certainly not an optimal situation for us. Taking a look at the standings, with us struggling here in the month of July, our lead over the Rangers has shrunk to 11.5 games. And our lead over the Red Sox for the best record in the AL and the best record in baseball has shrunk to 1.5 games. So things definitely getting a little more interesting. Darnell Selvey, second in the league in ribbies at this point. Luis Godina, third in OPS. And Federico Ariola, as he tries to pursue a fourth consecutive AL Cy Young Award, leading the league with 127 strikeouts. He's led the league in wins each of the last 3 years, with 19 in 2041 and 2042, and then 21 last season, with an 8-3 record this year. Unlikely to end up leading the league in wins again. And despite leading the league in strikeouts, that 4.17 ERA indicates that perhaps his streak of 3 consecutive Cy Young Awards is going to come to an end this November. In a positive piece of news, despite the fact that we haven't been playing that well on the field, two-time most valuable player and defending AL MVP Juan Pimentel just named the American League Player of the Week, .478 average with 2 homers, 12 ribbies, and 8 runs scored. For the season, it has to be considered a down year compared to his monster season a year ago, but Pimentel still hitting .291, 18 homers, 63 ribbies, and a 133 WRC plus for our Oakland A's here in 2044. And we'll turn our attention now to the player draft, looking at the mock draft. The number 1 pick expected to be the third baseman Zaire Lockjaw D'Ambreville. Certainly looks like a real interesting player. World-class contact, good gap power and eye, excellent speed. Not a great defensive player and not a lot of home run power. Does bring high leadership and work ethic into the clubhouse. Looking for a lot of money, $12 million to get him signed, but still would not expect that Lockjaw will be on the board when we are picking at number 35. And the mock draft was correct, at least at number 1. Lockjaw did go first overall to the Cincinnati Reds. The next 2 picks were second baseman Randy Wright. Looks like a very interesting hitting profile for him. Another guy who's not great defensively right now. Doesn't have the same kind of speed as D'Ambreville. And the third pick, the right fielder Joe Salazar, 21-year-old out of Wright State. Looks competent defensively and looks like he could have an above-average major league bat. Another guy looking for pretty big money. But let's take a look at who's on the board for us here at number 35. We'll take a look at the top pitchers who are still on the board first. Juan Rojas is the top high school prospect, at least according to our scout. Unfortunately, he's committed to Houston, and he's supposedly impossible to sign. Think he can be above average in terms of his stuff, movement, and control. Only a 3-pitch arsenal right now, so not a ton of margin for error, although we certainly could work on adding a pitch for the left-hander in the coming years. Good stamina, really good at holding on runners, some positive personality traits with the high work ethic and intelligence, but he is going to be looking for an insane amount of money, which probably isn't going to work for us, given that, as you can see, we've only got about $6.8 million in available budget room, and that's the $6 million that we have set aside for draftees, plus the $778,000 or so that we actually have ability to make moves with. So don't think that that's a realistic pursuit for us. Chris Sobolewski, college player out of Fresno State. Don't love the low leadership, adaptability, and work ethic, and although he's certainly further along than the high school players, for a college guy, he's still got some work to do to be ready in the majors. Also don't love that we expect his third and fourth pitches at best to be below average major league pitches. Not really all that interesting to me, although at least he's signable. Of the three-star ceiling prospects, there were 4 of these guys who stood out to me that I'll talk about. 17-year-old Vicente Adorno out of Portland, Maine. Slightly above average stuff and control if everything works out. Stamina and holding runners okay. Fly ball pitcher who throws in the low 90s. 4-pitch arsenal if everything works out, although none of them are exceptional. Can't say I'm in love with Adorno. Edgar Castro, an 18-year-old, another guy who could have above average stuff and control if everything works out. 3-pitch arsenal. I think his stamina and his ability to hold on runners are both pretty solid for the young lefty. Another starting pitching prospect, Grayson Cook. Higher end potential stuff for him. Do like the high loyalty and work ethic. Throws in the mid to high 90s already and has a potential 5-pitch arsenal. Fury Cook is probably the most interesting to me of the 3-star prospects. And honestly, given that Rojas is going to cost way too much, and I don't like Sobolewski's personality or his ceiling, I think Cook is probably my favorite of the ones that we've talked about. But the last guy that we're going to talk about is also pretty interesting, and that's the 17-year-old starting pitching prospect, Freddie Everding. Left-hander, high leadership, adaptability, and work ethic. Good stamina, exceptional at holding on runners, potentially 3 well above average major league pitches, and we think his curveball can be passable as well. Movement and control, we think best case scenario is that they'll be average for the lefty, but his stuff could be outstanding. So honestly, Everding and Grayson Cook, to me, are the 2 most interesting guys to consider among the pitchers. Grayson Cook looking for slot, and Everding looking for $240,000, which is actually less than slot, although given that he's listed as hard to sign, my hunch is that he'll end up looking for slot if we end up drafting him. Turning our attention now to the position players, there's 7 guys who have 4-star or higher potential according to our scout, including 3 5-star prospects. So we'll talk about each of them. Start with left fielder Tai Ranaka. Definitely not great defensively. Really slow in terms of his speed, but think he could be a solid contact hitter with plus home run power. Not looking for a ton of money, but really would hope we can do better than Ranaka as far as the 35th pick in the draft. Right fielder, Brad McCarty, a much more balanced hitting profile, better defensive player also, higher work ethic. The left-handed hitting outfielder out of Canby, Oregon, committed to Dallas, but certainly think that, although I can't say I'm in love with Brad McCarty, certainly like him better than Tai Ranaka. Another right fielder, Joe Madrigal, pretty well balanced out hitting profile. Gap power is the weakest, but he also doesn't have a ton of speed. Not a brilliant defensive player, does have a nice arm. Don't love the high leadership, loyalty, and work ethic, although he has some things he excels at and some things that you really don't love about him because he is smart and very adaptable. Old 45, though, probably would be on my initial list, ahead of Ranaka, but behind McCarty. And then the last of the 4-star prospects, first baseman J.J. Hagan. Pretty average at everything except his ability to hit out the ball out of the park, which looks exceptional. Another guy with pretty miserable speed and really brings almost nothing to the table defensively. He is durable. Looking at his profile, though, he is a pure first baseman or DH. Initial view, I think I like Ranaka the least of these guys, McCarthy the most, and Hagan and Madrigal both kind of meh upon, but have them ahead of Ranaka. I think Ranaka just between the lack of defensive ability, the lack of speed, and a ground ball hitter who's going to be reliant on home run power. Just don't know that he's ultimately really going to be what we're looking for. But I'm not going to lie, I'm certainly hoping one of the 5-star potential prospects jumps out to me, and kind of hope it won't be Jaquan Allah, because Allah is impossible to sign, so we'll start with him. Very interesting looking center fielder. Looks like he could play a competent center down the line, could probably be a good left or right fielder. Love the durability, and potentially well above average in all of the batting ratings with an exceptional eye. I'm sure that the fact that he's impossible to sign is a big part of the reason that Allah is here for us with the potential 35th pick. Right fielder Jeremy Bennett, looks like a potential two-way player. Not the greatest speed in the world, not the greatest defensively, but think that his contact and his home run power could both be a bit above average. Honestly, he looks to me like a better version of Ranaka offensively, and slightly better even defensively. But he's also got the potential to become a pitcher. Looking at those pitching ratings, think his stuff could be interesting, but the movement and control are both going to struggle to be major league quality. Does have 4 potential pitches that he's working on. Solid stamina, pretty good at holding on runners. I just don't know that Bennett is ultimately going to excel enough in anything to justify a first-round pick, but certainly would have to consider him based on what we've seen so far. So clearly I'm hoping that I'm going to fall in love with the last guy that we're going to look at, the 17-year-old center fielder, Pat Hamiter. Really looks more like a corner outfielder to me than a center fielder. I do think it's a pretty well-balanced bat, though, potentially well above average contact, and really good at making contact and avoiding strikeouts. And we think his gap power, his home run power, and his eye could all be above average as well. Like the durability. I think my initial thought is I'm not in love with any of these guys here. Probably not going to be in love with anyone at number 35, but just based on the difference between what Allah and Hamiter are asking for, I think I would probably lead towards Pat Hamiter over Bennett and McCarty with my first round pick. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got the 35th pick this year, but then we don't have any supplemental picks. So going to be 33 more picks until we're on the clock again. So basically just have to take the player that we like the most. But we'll at least talk about where these guys are in the mock draft, which I guess can help inform our strategy a bit. The young pitcher Freddie Everding is not expected to go in the first 5 rounds of the draft, or more accurately, was not expected to go in the first 5 rounds of the mock draft when this was put together a few months ago, as some of you like to remind me in the comment section. Definitely with the enhancements to the draft coming up in OOTP 26, which is less than 2 weeks away at this point. Hope that perhaps the mock draft will get either a little more timely in terms of being done closer to the time of the draft, or perhaps a little more accurate in how things ultimately go. I'd be surprised if Everding makes it to the 6th round, but does seem like someone who we probably don't need to reach for in the 1st round. Can't say the same thing about Grayson Cook, though. We mentioned we really liked his arsenal and like how hard the 18-year-old throws. He's expected to go with the 4th pick in the 2nd round. So if we wanted to bring Grayson Cook on board this year, probably need to do it right now. And the position players are all over the map, too. Very weird, given that he's viewed as a 5-star prospect. I mentioned that I didn't love Jeremy Bennett, but he is not projected to go in the first 5 rounds. I think it's just a situation where the game doesn't really know how to handle a potential two-way player like him. Because if you look at the OSA ratings, the OSA also has him pretty highly regarded. So seems like if we wanted him, maybe it can wait a little bit. As I mentioned, he's not expected to go in the first 5 rounds. Some of the other players that we have thought about also potentially can wait on a little bit as well if we wanted to. Brad McCarty, the right fielder, who was one of our favorites, expected to go with the 6th pick in the 3rd round. So a chance he lasts our pick in the 2nd round. J.J. Hagan, the first baseman, expected to go to us with the 32nd pick in the 2nd round. So both McCarty and Hagan are guys who, if we wanted to roll the dice, theoretically could fall to us with our 2nd pick. And Ty Ranaka, who I mentioned we didn't love, expected to go with the 16th pick in the 3rd round. So another guy that we could potentially wait on if we decided we thought he wasn't good enough to be the 1st round pick, but might want him in a round or 2. But the 3 other position players we haven't talked about were all expected to already be off the board at this point. On what might be surprising, Joe Madrigal was expected to go first of any of these players. He was mocked with the 18th pick in the draft, so clearly if we wanted to bring on old 45, now is probably the time to do it. But we don't love his personality, so we'll probably go in a different direction. Jaquan Allah, expected to go with the 29th pick overall, mentioned that the fact that he's impossible to sign, probably allowing him to linger a bit. But given that there's not really a good practical way other than trading away a player for a ton of money, which certainly I'm willing to do, but outside of that, there's not really a path for us to get the money we might need to sign Jaquan. And then last but not least, Pat Hameter, the center field, who I think is who I'm leaning towards based on this first look, was expected to go with the 25th pick in this 1st round. So the fact that he's still on board at number 35 is positive. As we talked about, like the durability and really like the well-balanced bat. Speed is average. The glove is kind of meh. But a left-handed hitter with some potential. Interesting guy to bring on board. Not the biggest guy in the world at 5'10", $170. Certainly by far the smallest guy of these top prospects. But I think that my initial inclination would probably be to go with Hameter if I was going to do a pitcher. I think it kind of has to be Grayson Cook, since, as I mentioned, he's expected to go a few picks from now with the 4th pick in the 2nd round. So if we wanted Grayson Cook, I think now is the time to bring him on board. So my very early and not incredibly well thought out reaction is probably that the center fielder Pat Hameter or the starting pitcher Grayson Cook is the way I'm inclined to go here in the 1st round. But always helpful to hear what the Worldwide Scouting Department thinks about these big decisions. for those of you who are wondering, have looked at some college players, and there's just no one here at this point in the draft that's particularly interesting, at least to me, for a first round pick. So, not going to bore you with those details. But if you've got thoughts on what we should do among the players that we've talked about, would love to hear them. As I mentioned, hasn't been a great 10 or 11 day stretch for Oakland here at the start of July, but we still have at this point the best record in baseball, and hopefully we'll be able to play better over the final 2.5, 3 weeks of July as we get ready for the trade deadline, prepare for the All-Star game between now and then. Before we finish things up, we'll just take a look if there's anything materially different in terms of the trade block. Batter-wise, definitely a lot more people out there, including our old friend Jake Ortega, who's still out 4 to 5 weeks with a strained ab. C.J. McLaughlin, he'd be an interesting guy to bring on board. The 32-year-old outfielder making a ton of money, but in the final year of his contract. Brings a lot of positive things to the clubhouse. The fans are going to love him. Solid defensively and still a pretty productive bat. The issue is that he's wrecked physically at this point, so making a ton of money, and likely, I'm assuming, would still cost a bit in a trade. And actually, right now, he's exercising his 10-5 rights, so not even something we need to spend any time thinking about at this point. Always interested in our old friend Jake Ortega, still dealing with multiple injuries, the quad strain as well as the strained ab. As we talked about last episode, played just 24 games at the major league level this year. No longer really a good defensive center fielder, which is unfortunate. He is a guy who won a Gold Glove in center field for us back in 2036, but certainly time and injuries have taken their toll on Ortega. Just for the fun of it, we'll see what they'd be looking for to retain 80% of his contract, and they're actually looking for a lot. Always interested in exploring a potential reunion with the franchise, but given that he's not going to be healthy until mid to late August, and they're asking a lot for him with a number that kind of could work for us, don't necessarily think that that is a very realistic option. The other guy who at least attracted my initial attention, center fielder Ernesto Farfan. Really good defensively with that 70 range, has excellent base running instincts, and he's been an above average offensive player this year, although when we look at the bat, certainly on paper, I think Bobby Armstrong's bat looks better, but Farfan, over the course of his career, has been an average offensive player, and we can't say the same thing about Bobby Armstrong. Farfan wouldn't cost a lot. Looks like the Twins had traded him to the Giants, and they retained 80% of his contract. So certainly a guy that financially we would be able to bring on board. Looks like the demands for him are pretty high at this point, however, so don't necessarily think, given that I don't see him being a true difference maker, that that would be a path for us to consider. Always interested in exploring who is available as far as pitchers as well, so we will check on the pitchers who are on the trade block at this point. Our old buddy Jonathan Shearer, we traded him away this past off season. He was part of that really big trade that ultimately brought us back Kevin King. We traded the starter Doug Weiss, 3-5 with a 5.90 ERA this year. So he's been pitching for them. He started 14 games, but the injuries and it looks like age are catching up with Weiss a little bit, so I think it's good that we moved on from him. But we also included a solid major league catcher in Ron Markley, interesting third base prospect in Chris Tabat, starting pitching prospect in Tim Day with ridiculous stuff in addition to Shearer to pick up Kevin King. Shearer making over $6 million this year was just expensive for us to keep in a setup role at that price, given that he wasn't going to be our closer with the brilliant Joe Heilman on our team. But Shearer having a respectable year for Arizona with a 3.38 ERA and a 1.5 WAR, a little past the midway point of the season. With the injury issues we've had, certainly wouldn't mind adding another very accomplished arm back into our bullpen. I tend to think they're probably going to want a lot for him. Yeah, big-time player, but that could also just be because we don't have a lot of salary flexibility. If we want them to keep 90% of his contract, it does expand the list a bit. They're still looking for either top prospects or important major league players. So I don't know that there's an obvious guy that I'd be willing to give up for a rental of Jonathan Shearer. But if we wanted to do that, it certainly seems like there are options out there to reunite with the excellent right-handed reliever who has been part of our last 4 World Championship teams. So don't necessarily see any magic fixes for us on the trade block at this point. We'll continue to spend some time offline exploring whether there's any interesting options for center field or perhaps the pitching staff that aren't on the trade block. And as I noted at the start of the episode, there are some options for us in the minor leagues as well. Given that we're having a great season, definitely I don't feel a ton of urgency to do anything immediately. See a few more cards over the next 2.5, 3 weeks as we close in on the trade deadline, and then potentially make some decisions later in the month. But the big decisions we're focused on right now are in the draft. And if you've got any thoughts on what you would do if you were in our position with the 35th overall pick, would love to hear what they are. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.